Dean Vorthak had perfected the art of delivering bad news with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a surprise party. His chitinous mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile as he surveyed the assembled cadets in the Nexus Military Academy's grand auditorium, a space designed to accommodate everything from 30-meter crystalline beings to thumb-sized hive minds in their mobile suits. Effective immediately, Vorthak announced, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into crisp standard. The Academy is implementing the Deathworld exclusion protocol. The reaction was immediate and predictably chaotic. 300 alien species, each convinced their homeworld was the epitome of civilized living, erupted into a cacophony of protests, questions, and what could generously be called interspecies commentary. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story. Finally, hissed Cadet Zethrix, her serpentine form coiled around her hover platform. No more listening to those Krillian mining worlders brag about their harsh 3-gravity environment. The Krillians, built like ambulatory boulders with delusions of sophistication, rumbled their displeasure. Harsh? One boomed. Your swamp world barely qualifies as a biosphere. You breathe methane. Methane is a perfectly respectable atmospheric component, Zethrix shot back, unlike whatever passes for air in your underground tunnels. Dean Vorthak's mandibles clicked louder, the administrative equivalent of tapping a gavel. If I may continue, he said, though his tone suggested he'd continue regardless of permission. Recent psychological evaluations have revealed concerning patterns among cadets from worlds classified as Category 7 or higher on the Existential Hostility Index. This triggered a fresh wave of debate. Everyone knew the classification system, though most assumed it was wildly inaccurate when applied to their own planets. Category 1. Worlds were garden paradises, where the biggest threat was mild indigestion. Category 10 worlds were theoretical nightmares that existed primarily in computer simulations designed to traumatize xenobiology students. 3 cadets from Category 9 worlds suffered complete psychological breaks during routine combat simulations, Vorthak continued. They exhibited what our counselors termed hypervigilance syndrome and catastrophic thinking patterns. One individual barricaded himself in his dormitory for 6 cycles, convinced that the Academy's artificial gravity would fail and crush him. The Aquatic Collective's representative, a jellyfish-like being whose tank bobbed gently on repulsors, pulsed with what might have been amusement. Category 9? How do beings from such environments even achieve spaceflight? Careful, Bubble Brain, growled a cadet from one of the desert worlds. Some of us had to evolve past floating around, waiting for plankton to drift by. At least I don't shed skin particles everywhere I go, the aquatic shot back. Do you know how many filtration alerts you trigger? Vorthak's patience was wearing thin, which was unfortunate because he'd started with very little. The point, he said, his voice carrying the sort of authority that suggested immediate consequences for interruption, is that beings from genuinely dangerous worlds lack the psychological flexibility required for modern military service. They're too damaged by their environments to function in civilized conflict scenarios. This sparked a new controversy as cadets began debating what constituted genuine danger. The crystalline beings from Helix Prime, who grew in perfectly ordered geometric formations on a planet where the most exciting weather event was a minor silicon shower, looked down, literally, on everyone else. The thermal void dwellers, accustomed to temperatures that would instantly freeze most organic compounds, scoffed at complaints about hostile environments from beings who required liquid water to survive. This is discrimination based on planetary prejudice, declared Cadet Urix, whose species had evolved on a world where the oceans occasionally boiled. What's next, excluding anyone who's experienced a solar flare? Solar flares are Category 6 at most, pointed out a representative from the tidally locked worlds. Unless you're talking about the X-class events, but those only happen every few thousand cycles. Every few thousand cycles? Urix's chromatophores flashed indignant purple. Try every season. We evolved underground cities because staying on the surface during summer meant spontaneous combustion. That's nothing, rumbled one of the gas giant dwellers. Our entire atmospheric layer shifts every few cycles. Pressure changes that would implode most habitats are just weather to us. The debate was reaching the sort of productive intensity that suggested it might continue for several geological ages when a small hand raised near the back of the auditorium. Dean Vorthak, grateful for any interruption that wasn't species-based chest thumping, nodded towards the figure. Yes, Cadet. KX7 ? The designation was bureaucratic shorthand. The Academy had given up trying to pronounce names from certain worlds and simply assigned alphanumeric codes. KX7 was humanoid, roughly 2 meters tall, with the sort of unremarkable appearance that suggested a standard oxygen-breathing, carbon-based evolutionary path. Just want to clarify the policy, KX7 said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Does this apply to cadets already enrolled, or just new applications? Vorthak's mandibles clicked uncertainly. He hadn't expected implementation questions. Well, existing cadets would need to be evaluated case by case, I suppose. What's your world's classification? KX7 consulted a small device. Category 12. The auditorium fell silent. Category 12 didn't exist on the official scale. The existential hostility index only went to 10, and that was considered a theoretical maximum, a mathematical construct, representing conditions so hostile that sapient life was considered impossible. That must be an error, Vorthak said, his voice losing its administrative confidence. What world are you from? Earth, KX7 replied, as if this explained everything. It explained nothing. No one had heard of Earth. But suddenly everyone was very interested in hearing more. I'm sure there's been a clerical mistake, Vorthak continued, though his mandibles were clicking in patterns that suggested deep unease. What sort of conditions does your homeworld have? KX7 shrugged. Pretty standard stuff. Weather, tectonic activity, occasional mass extinction events. You know, the usual. The silence stretched longer. In the back of the auditorium, someone's environmental suit made a soft beeping sound. Probably a stress monitor reaching alert levels. Mass extinction events are usual, whispered the representative from the aquatic collective, their tank's pH levels visibly fluctuating. Every 65 million years or so, KX7 confirmed cheerfully, though we had a few smaller ones in between. Keeps things interesting. Dean Vorthak's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. This was never a good sign. I'll need to verify your world's classification, he said finally. Until then, please report to administrative processing for evaluation. As the assembly began to disperse, much more quietly than they'd arrived, conversations centered around the mysterious KX7 and her casual mention of planetary genocide as a recurring weather pattern. 65 million year cycles, muttered Cadet Zethrix to her neighbor. What kind of evolutionary pressure produces beings who treat extinction-level events as background noise? The answer, as Dean Vorthak was about to discover, was significantly more disturbing than anyone in the auditorium could have imagined. Administrative processing turned out to be a euphemism for frantically searching databases while trying not to panic. Dean Vorthak hunched over his terminal in his private office, his mandibles twitching as security clearance after security clearance scrolled past his credentials. The Galactic Survey database was typically accommodating. Want to know the atmospheric composition of Kepler 442b? No problem. Curious about the mineral distribution on Proxima Centauri C? Here's a full geological survey. But Earth's file sat behind warnings that would have made a weapons inspector nervous. Classification. Level. Administrative override required psychological evaluation. Mandatory before access. Recommendation. Consult xenobiology. Trauma counselor Vorthak inputted his override codes with increasing desperation. The computer seemed to be giving him time to reconsider, processing each request with deliberate slowness that suggested artificial intelligence judgment. Finally, Earth's profile materialized on his screen, and immediately he understood why the computer had been reluctant. The planet was a catalog of horrors disguised as meteorological data. Atmospheric storms capable of generating winds that could strip metal from buildings. Geological activity that could literally split continents. Magnetic field fluctuations that regularly bathed the surface in radiation lethal to most known species. But the biological survey was where things became genuinely disturbing. Vorthak read about predator-prey relationships so vicious they made the Krillian gladiator pits look like recreational dancing. Parasitic organisms that could hijack their hosts' nervous systems. Viral mutations that occurred with such frequency that the dominant species had evolved an immune system that essentially waged constant warfare against microscopic invaders. "Oh," he said aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Oh no." Meanwhile, in the Academy's Student Research Center, KX-7 had become an object of intense scientific curiosity. Word had spread through the dormitory networks with the efficiency of particularly virulent gossip, and half the Academy's xenobiology students had commandeered terminals to investigate this mysterious Earth. Cadet Urix, whose species prided themselves on surviving boiling oceans, stared at her screen in growing horror. "Their tidal forces can shift trillions of liters of water twice daily," she announced to the gathered crowd. "For fun." "That's impossible," protested one of the desert dwellers. "No ecosystem could survive that kind of regular disruption." "Look at this," called out Zethrix, her serpentine form coiled around a terminal. "They have weather systems called hurricanes that can maintain wind speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour for days. Days. The thermal void representative, whose species considered anything above absolute zero to be tropical, was examining atmospheric data with visible distress. Temperature variations of 40 degrees within a single rotation? How do their biological systems not shut down from thermal shock? But it was Cadet Nexon from the Crystal Gardens who made the discovery that silenced the research center entirely. His geometric form pulsed with bioluminescent alarm as he projected his findings onto the main display. "They evolved from persistence hunters," he announced, his crystalline voice ringing with disbelief. "Their ancestors chased prey across continents until the target animals collapsed from exhaustion." The implications sank in slowly. A species that had evolved to literally run their food to death. No ambush tactics, no tool use, no clever strategies, just relentless, terrifying endurance. "That's not hunting," whispered the Aquatic Collective's representative. "That's psychological warfare." KX-7, meanwhile, had found herself surrounded by cadets eager to verify these disturbing reports. She sat in the dormitory common area, looking mildly confused by all the attention. "Is it true your species sweats toxins?" asked Cadet Blinex, a small, furry being whose homeworld's most dangerous predator was roughly equivalent to a particularly aggressive flower. "Sweat isn't toxic," KX-7 replied patiently. "It's just salt water and metabolic waste. Very efficient cooling system." "You secrete waste products through your skin?" Blinex's fur stood on end. While you're moving? Only when we're active. Though I guess we're always secreting something. Skin cells, oils, various chemical markers. KX7 trailed off as she noticed the growing horror on her audience's faces. It's perfectly normal biological function. Normal, echoed Zethrix faintly. You consider constant toxin secretion normal. What about the lightning? Interrupted Urix. The database says your homeworld generates electrical discharges with enough power to vaporize organic matter. KX7 brightened. Oh, thunderstorms. Yeah, those are great. Very relaxing. I used to sleep with recordings of thunder when I first got to the academy. The artificial quiet here is unsettling. The assembled cadets exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their collective sanity concerns. You find atmospheric electrical warfare relaxing? Nexon's crystalline form was pulsing with what his species used to indicate extreme stress. The sound of potential death helps you achieve rest states. It's white noise, KX7 explained, apparently oblivious to the growing crowd of cadets who were backing away from her. Very soothing, although I do miss the earthquakes. Nothing like a good tectonic shift to help you sleep. Earthquakes, Blinex repeated slowly. You miss geological instability. Sure, the gentle rumbling, the way everything sways slightly. It's very peaceful, though I guess you'd need to grow up with it to appreciate the subtlety. At this point, several cadets were openly consulting their species equivalent of medical texts, trying to determine if they were experiencing auditory hallucinations. Cadet Trex, a being whose entire evolutionary history had been shaped by living in perfectly stable underground caverns, raised a trembling appendage. What about the predators? The database mentions something called bears? Oh, bears are wonderful, KX7 said warmly. Magnificent animals, very intelligent, very strong. I saw one flip over a 2-ton boulder once, just looking for grubs underneath. And this was a positive experience for you. Well, I was about 30 meters away and upwind, so it didn't notice me. But yes, absolutely fascinating to watch. The research center had gone completely silent. On every terminal, Earth's biological survey data painted a picture of evolutionary pressures so extreme that they bordered on the sadistic. Yet here sat one of Earth's products, describing predators capable of casually manipulating multi-ton objects as wonderful and atmospheric violence as relaxing. Back in his office, Dean Vorthak was discovering additional complexities in Earth's file. The planet wasn't just hostile, it was creatively hostile. Weather patterns that could create tornadoes, floods, droughts, and ice storms sometimes within the same geographical region. Volcanic activity that could alter global climate patterns. Ocean currents that could shift entire ecosystems without warning. But the footnote at the bottom of the geological survey made him realize that the Academy had a much larger problem than simple policy implementation. Additional note: despite extreme environmental hostility, dominant species has achieved technological advancement sufficient for interstellar travel within approximately 10,000 rotations of planetary development. This represents the fastest technological progression in galactic survey records. Vorthak stared at the screen, his administrative confidence finally crumbling entirely. Earth hadn't just produced a dangerous individual, it had created a species that treated existential horror as a development opportunity. And they'd let one of them into military academy. Academy regulations, like most bureaucratic constructs, possessed a peculiar immunity to common sense. Despite discovering that KX7 hailed from what amounted to a planetary torture device, protocol demanded she complete her initial tactical assessment before any administrative decisions could be finalized. Commander Kelthera, the Academy's head of practical evaluations, reviewed the simulation parameters with the grim determination of someone defusing an unexploded ordnance. She'd selected Scenario 47 Alpha, a straightforward hostage extraction that most cadets found moderately challenging. Nothing too complex. Infiltrate a facility, neutralize guards, extract civilians, minimize casualties. Standard difficulty rating? Asked her assistant, a nervous centaurian whose species had evolved in perfectly controlled biodomes. Minimum, Calthera replied firmly. We're not trying to traumatize the subject, just assess baseline competency. The simulation chamber hummed to life, projecting a three-dimensional industrial complex complete with guard patrols, security systems, and 12 civilian hostages scattered throughout the facility. Standard terrorist scenario, the kind that appeared on military academy curricula across the galaxy. KX-7 stepped into the chamber wearing standard-issue tactical gear that looked somehow insufficient on her frame. The equipment had been designed for species that approached conflict with rational caution, not beings whose ancestors had chased mammoths across ice fields for entertainment. Scenario parameters, announced the system's artificial intelligence. Hostile forces have secured 12 civilians in an industrial facility. Your mission is extraction with minimal casualties. You have 60 minutes. Begin. What followed was a systematic deconstruction of everything the Academy thought it knew about tactical doctrine. KX-7 spent exactly 37 seconds studying the facility layout, then moved with the sort of purposeful efficiency that suggested she'd done this before, preferably during recess. She bypassed the main entrances, identified structural weak points that weren't supposed to exist in the simulation, and began what could generously be called infiltration. She's ignoring the designated entry points, observed the assistant, watching from the control booth. Maybe she's being cautious, Calthera replied, though her voice carried the tone of someone trying to convince herself. KX-7's version of caution involved scaling the facility's exterior wall using nothing but fingertips and sheer bloody-mindedness. The simulation's architects had included handholds for species with specialized climbing adaptations, but KX-7 was using irregularities in the surface that barely qualified as texture. How is she maintaining grip on a 90-degree surface? Muttered the assistant. Persistence hunting adaptation, Calthera said faintly, remembering the afternoon's research discoveries. Enhanced muscular endurance and grip strength. The first guard encountered KX-7 received what military textbooks would classify as a non-lethal incapacitation technique. What actually happened looked more like applied physics with malicious intent. The guard, a holographic construct designed to withstand standard academy training protocols, simply ceased to function after KX-7 applied pressure to what appeared to be empty air near his neck. She just disabled a combat simulation with her bare hands, the assistant announced unnecessarily. I can see that. KX-7 continued through the facility with the mechanical precision of someone following a recipe. Guards were neutralized with distressing efficiency. Security systems were bypassed using methods that weren't technically cheating, but felt morally questionable. Locked doors presented minor inconveniences rather than tactical obstacles. She's treating this like a puzzle, Calthera observed. Not a combat scenario, a puzzle. Indeed, KX-7 moved through the simulation with the mild interest of someone solving a crossword during lunch break. When she encountered the facility's main security hub, designed to be the scenario's primary challenge, she spent perhaps 2 minutes examining the setup before implementing what could only be described as creative interpretation of mission parameters. Rather than attempting to hack the security system, she removed it entirely. Not through sophisticated electronic warfare, but by applying kinetic force to structural supports until the entire control panel assembly detached from the wall. That's not how you're supposed to solve that puzzle, the assistant whispered. "She's not solving the puzzle," Kelthera replied, her voice carrying dawning realization. "She's discarding it as irrelevant." The hostage extractions proceeded with similar directness. Each civilian was located, assessed for mobility, and evacuated via routes that existed more in theory than in architectural planning. KX-7 seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of structural engineering that the simulation's designers hadn't anticipated. "She's using load-bearing walls as impromptu exits," observed the assistant. "She's creating new tactical options by modifying the environment," Kelthera corrected. "That's not supposed to be possible in this simulation." But the truly disturbing moment came when KX-7 encountered the scenario's final challenge, a hostage situation designed to test moral reasoning under pressure. The terrorist leader, a sophisticated AI construct programmed with human-level intelligence, held a weapon to a civilian's head while demanding negotiations. Standard Academy doctrine called for careful psychological assessment, strategic communication, and gradual de-escalation. Most cadets spent 20 minutes in careful dialogue, working through approved negotiation protocols. KX-7 spent 4 seconds evaluating the situation, then moved. The control booth's instruments registered what happened next as a blur of motion that terminated with the terrorist construct sprawled unconscious and the civilian safely behind cover. Replay analysis suggested KX-7 had calculated trajectory, timing, and force application in real time, then executed a solution that bypassed negotiation entirely. "She just treated a complex ethical scenario as a geometry problem," the assistant said faintly. "And solved it correctly," Kelthera added, checking the civilian's status indicators. "0 casualties. Mission completed in 14 minutes and 37 seconds. The simulation chamber powered down, leaving KX-7 standing amid the holographic wreckage of what had been the Academy's standard tactical assessment. She looked mildly disappointed, as if she'd been expecting something more engaging. "Any questions about the scenario parameters?" Kelthera asked through the intercom. KX-7 shrugged. "Pretty straightforward, though the security systems were oddly primitive. Most of the solutions were fairly obvious. In the control booth, Kelthera and her assistant exchanged glances that conveyed several years' worth of existential crisis. "Obvious?" the assistant repeated slowly. "She found our most challenging tactical scenario obvious," Kelthera confirmed. They watched as KX-7 exited the chamber, apparently unaware that she'd just redefined what the Academy considered tactically possible. Her performance hadn't just exceeded expectations, it had invalidated the entire assessment framework. "Commander," the assistant asked quietly, "what do we do with a cadet who treats our hardest scenarios as warm-up exercises?" Kelthera stared at the simulation data streaming across her displays. Completion time, tactical efficiency, casualty minimization. Every metric suggested they'd just witnessed either exceptional competency or functional psychopathy. Possibly both. "We," she said finally, "are going to need a much larger evaluation framework." Outside the simulation chamber, KX-7 checked her schedule for the next appointment, blissfully unaware that the Academy's entire tactical training program was about to undergo emergency revision. 3 months later, the Nexus Military Academy had quietly become the most popular institution of higher learning in the known galaxy. Applications had tripled, waiting lists stretched across star systems, and the Academy's marketing department had given up trying to explain why everyone suddenly wanted to attend a military school. The official reason was enhanced interdisciplinary studies. The unofficial reason was that KX-7 had become the galaxy's most reluctant celebrity. Dean Vorthak reviewed the morning's enrollment statistics with the weary satisfaction of someone who'd learned to embrace administrative chaos. The Deathworld exclusion protocol had been renamed the Cultural Integration Initiative and filed under Educational Innovation. No one mentioned that this innovation primarily consisted of letting other species observe a human go about her daily routine. Survival Fundamentals with instructor KX7 had become the Academy's most requested and most traumatizing elective. The waiting list included cadets from species who'd previously considered themselves apex predators. Today, we're covering basic environmental awareness, KX7 announced to her latest class, a collection of beings who represented the galactic elite's finest military specimens. Who can tell me what to do if you're caught in open terrain during an electrical storm? Cadet Vexhai, whose crystalline homeworld experienced weather as gently as a meditation retreat, raised a faceted appendage. Seek immediate shelter in the nearest artificial structure? Good start, KX7 agreed. But what if there's no shelter available? The class exchanged nervous glances. This was typically where KX7's lessons diverged from conventional wisdom and entered territory that most species' evolution had sensibly avoided. Lie flat against the ground, she continued. Make yourself the lowest point in the immediate area. Remove any metal objects from your person. If you feel your hair standing up, assuming you have hair, you have approximately 30 seconds before lightning strikes your location. 30 seconds to do what? Asked Cadet Zephin, whose aquatic species had never encountered weather more threatening than a mild current change. Find a depression in the ground, assume the lightning crouch position, and wait for the immediate danger to pass. The lightning crouch position, Zephin repeated faintly. Feet together, crouching on the balls of your feet, hands over your ears, head tucked. Minimize ground contact while staying low. The class absorbed this information with the sort of silence usually reserved for funeral services. This is considered basic knowledge on your homeworld, inquired Cadet Thorix, whose species had evolved in underground caverns where the most exciting atmospheric event was a gentle breeze. Elementary school curriculum, KX7 confirmed, cheerfully. Usually covered around age 7, right after don't eat the pretty mushrooms and check for bears before setting up camp. Professor Yilneth, the Academy's senior xenobiology instructor, had taken to auditing these sessions for what he claimed were professional development purposes. In reality, he was documenting the systematic revelation that human childhood education included survival skills that would challenge military specialists from other worlds. Last week she taught them how to purify water using solar radiation in clear containers, he muttered to his research assistant. The week before, it was identifying edible plants versus toxic lookalikes. These aren't advanced survival techniques. They're what human children learn at summer camps. The assistant, a methodical being whose species approached knowledge acquisition with religious reverence, updated his notes. Should we be concerned about the psychological impact on other students? Yilneth considered this question while watching KX7 demonstrate how to construct emergency shelter using debris and body heat. Half the class looked fascinated. The other half looked like they were questioning their life choices. Honestly, I think exposure therapy might be beneficial. Most of these cadets come from worlds where hostile environment means the climate control system fluctuated by 2 degrees. Indeed, KX7's mere presence had begun reshaping the Academy's entire approach to risk assessment. The combat simulation programs, previously considered appropriately challenging, had been redesigned 3 times to accommodate cadets who'd learned from someone who treated hypothermia as a minor inconvenience. Environmental hazard recognition had expanded from a single-day workshop to a full semester course. Emergency resource management now included modules on improvised tools, makeshift weapons, and what KX7 cheerfully called aggressive foraging techniques. The Academy's medical staff had requested additional training after several incidents involving cadets who'd enthusiastically attempted to implement human-standard basic first aid on classmates. Apparently, what constituted acceptable emergency medicine on Earth bordered on surgical intervention elsewhere. But perhaps the most significant change was in dormitory assignments. KX-7's roommate, a delicate being from the gossamer worlds whose species had evolved in perpetual springtime, had initially requested emergency relocation after learning her roommate slept soundly through what she considered apocalyptic weather simulation recordings. 6 weeks later, Cadet Shimmer had become the Academy's unofficial ambassador for human normalcy. She could now sleep through thunderstorm recordings, had learned to appreciate the aesthetic value of geological documentaries, and no longer flinched when KX-7 mentioned childhood activities that involved deliberately seeking out dangerous wildlife. "She's remarkably adaptable," Shimmer explained to concerned friends from her homeworld. "Once you accept that her entire species evolved to find mortal peril relaxing, she's actually quite pleasant company." This philosophical adjustment had become something of a trend. Cadets across the Academy were discovering that reality recalibration, while initially traumatic, offered unexpected benefits. Students who'd learned to think like humans approached problems with creative brutality that their instructors found both disturbing and remarkably effective. Dean Vorthak's final log entry of the semester reflected this institutional transformation with characteristic bureaucratic understatement. Educational Initiative Assessment. The Cultural Integration Protocol has exceeded projected outcomes. Student performance metrics have improved across all practical applications. Psychological counseling requests have stabilized at acceptable levels. Recommendation: continue current programming with expanded safety protocols and enhanced counselor availability. Note: Earth's classification has been updated to Educational Exemption Required, pending development of appropriate assessment frameworks. Standard Deathworld protocols deemed inadequate for accurate evaluation. Personal observation: it remains unclear whether we are training these cadets to survive in hostile environments or simply teaching them to recognize that most environments are considerably less hostile than they previously believed. Down in Dormitory Block 7, KX-7 was helping Shimmer with her tactical planning homework, completely unaware that her casual existence had revolutionized military education across 3 sectors. "I still don't understand why you find rain comforting," Shimmer admitted, reviewing weather-based tactical scenarios. "It's the sound," KX-7 explained patiently. "Very soothing. Plus, it means the air is being cleaned, the ground is getting watered, and there's less chance of fire. You consider the absence of fire to be a positive environmental condition?" "Well, yes. Uncontrolled fire is generally inconvenient." Shimmer made a note in her assignment pad, part of her ongoing project to document human baseline assumptions about environmental safety. Her research had become remarkably popular among xenopsychology students. "On my world," she mentioned, "we consider the presence of moisture to be an unusual weather event." "That sounds lovely," KX-7 said genuinely. "Very stable ecosystem. Must be peaceful." And there, in that simple exchange, lay the fundamental transformation that neither the Academy nor the galaxy had quite grasped yet. KX-7 wasn't the dangerous anomaly they'd feared. She was proof that their understanding of danger had been embarrassingly limited all along.